Okay, so today we are learning about how to find newspaper articles. So, newspapers are another thing that is fantastic for your research. Things you find in newspapers are records of current events and major happenings. Newspapers are considered primary resources because they give you eyewitness accounts of events. They're great for current things. They're great for getting a historical perspective of what was reported about events that happened in the past. So they should be included in a lot of your research. You also get within newspapers, you get viewpoints of through editorials and opinion sections of how do actual public members feel about this, or you get expert opinions about current events or things that are happening and stuff like that. So newspapers can really be important research. Newspapers is also the first place you're going to see information published about events happening. That newspapers, most major ones come out daily, more local ones come out a few times a week sometimes if you're in a rural area, but most of the time you get 365 issues a year of major papers, and so these are things that are being updated within 24 hours of your hearing about major events and what is going on. So they're the first place you're learning of information, whereas popular magazines that might come out weekly or every other week or once a month, or scholarly academic journal articles and books that can take months to years to write and publish and come out in print, you have that time gap. So looking at some of your topics when you're researching and writing articles, if you're talking about something that's happening right now, you're going to be stuck with newspapers for research. So it's a good idea to know how to find these within the library databases, because even major newspapers like the Washington Post or the New York Times or the LA Times, or if you're looking for local things like the Robertsonian or the Charlotte Observer or the papers coming out of Raleigh, Durham, you're going to have limited access on their website without subscribing. But libraries do subscribe to these type of newspapers and periodicals and serials, and so you can access them through our databases. Newspapers is something that you're not going to find in Primo. If you're doing Primo searches and you're looking at, let's do COVID-19. Let's talk about what we got right now going on. If you're looking over here at resource type, you're seeing articles. Occasionally, you do see newspapers come up here as a resource, but it's actually pretty rare. If you are not getting resource type as a newspaper article within COVID-19, you can pretty much know I'm not going to be getting this. So even if I sign in, let's see if I get anything when I do sign in. Okay, so still, you're just getting articles. That is not including newspaper articles. Primo does not like newspapers. Very, very, very few of our newspaper titles that we subscribe to through our databases are available in Primo. Reason for that is vendors. The companies don't like each other and they don't want to work together. So it is something that's left out of your search. So Primo is not your friend for newspapers. This is not where you should be searching. Where you go for newspapers is our newspaper-specific databases. So coming back to resources over on the right, back to databases, we do have news resources over here as one of our subject heading. And so this is going to bring you databases that come up with newspaper-specific searches. And so you get this gold box of best bets up here at the top. If you're specifically looking for newspapers, this is where I would start. You do, if you scroll down, you see other places you can find this, like Masterfile Premier is one of those EBSCOhost databases. That's a general search database we talked about. So you can find newspapers through EBSCOhost and ProQuest, through doing searches like Academic Search Ultimate and ProQuest Research Library, but they're not where I would start. If you know you're looking for news, it's better to come to some of these best bet databases. And the one I want to talk to you about in this video is this first one, America's News. I'm a big fan of America's News. I think we briefly talked about it in the topic development video because it's one of these good places that bring you some of these special topics and hot topics and suggested things. And so they're bringing you ideas of current topics and then connecting you to articles that'll provide you with more information about this. But America's News brings most of your major national newspapers, so things like Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, etc., are included within this. But if you're scrolling down, you're seeing you also get some of our local papers, so like the Charlotte Observer, the Herald Sun coming out of Durham, the News and Observer coming out of Raleigh, that kind of thing. They are included in this. So they do major state and regional newspapers as well. So you don't get the Robertsonian through America's News. They do want the more major cities, but you can get like the major state newspapers for everywhere you're looking for. So continuing with our COVID-19 search. So searching within this is like searching within any other database. Have your search terms. You have an advanced search option if you're adding multiple keywords together. You get your sort by option over here, so you can limit by date range. You can limit by source type. So America's News defaults to newspapers is its biggest journal type that is within it. That's its biggest source type as newspapers, but you also get news wires. So if you remember us talking about good news sources back in evaluation, things like the Associated Press, Reuters, Newswire are these newswire sources. You can get those from there. You also bring in video and audio news sources. So things like you're seeing news media in the form of television and radio. So some of these are being included because you see you have certain news sites that kind of overlap with that sort of resource, that they come out both in print and on media, television and radio as well. So you have a good overlap. This is also another database that sorts by date. So it automatically defaults to bringing you the most recent articles first. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes that's not. So if you're not bringing up things that are really relevant to you, you might want to switch that to best match. That's going to be a relevance keyword search instead of a date. So you're not changing your keywords or your limiters, you're just kind of reorganizing what comes up to the top. So you're bringing the most relevant things to the top of the pile instead of the newest things. That being said, everything's coming up within the past month or so for most of these. Accessing it, click on a title, and you get the HTML. So most newspapers don't automatically have a PDF download. You're not going to be getting the same benefits to a PDF download for newspaper articles because newspaper articles are pretty short. They're not the lengthy articles you see with peer-reviewed scholarly research. They're a few paragraphs, most of them, and that's the entire article. So most of them are just HTML. However, you do have options for citing, for emailing this to yourself. You can download it, so you could download it as a PDF, so you're saving it that way. America's News allows that. Other newspaper databases do not, but it is an option for saving that way. You can create an account within America's News, just like everything else, and save, as well as getting your permalink to get back to exactly this page. So pretty easy on how to search, where to search, how this functions. It's just another news source, another tool the library has you need to be aware of. So under the databases, it's called America's News. That is the specific collection our library subscribes to. America's News is owned by this news bank. And so if you're seeing both of those titles up here, this is the database title. Remember, when you're citing these, what you want is the actual article info. So I do not care that it came out of Newsbank. I want to know where this article was originally published. And so that's where you're seeing this comes out of PR Newswire USA. You don't have an author for this one. Newswire sources often don't. Other articles, if we're coming out, okay, so this Roswell Daily Record. So you do have the author, Lisa Dunlap. This is the article title. That Roswell Daily Record, which comes out of New Mexico, that is your newspaper title. So that is what you are citing for your citation. You do not need to tell me it comes from Newsbank. That's not part of the citation. We want to know which newspaper or news magazine this came out of. Another thing to remember with APA citations, when you're getting newspapers, if it has the state or the city out next to this, so this NM is for New Mexico, that is something you want to include with the title. For example, the News and Observer that is such a generic name for a newspaper that could be coming from anywhere within the United States. So we need to have that it comes from Raleigh, North Carolina, in parentheses next to that title. So if you're seeing those next to newspaper titles, make sure you're taking that as part of the title. It is important so that we know which News and Observer. There's more than one News and Observer newspaper in the United States, so you need to know which one it's coming from. So make sure you're including that with your citations. That is kind of a quick shot into America's News. We do have digital archives access with the Robinsonian, which is the local paper for Robinson County, so you can definitely look through those. Another more larger search that is pretty popular is this Nexis Uni, and if you remember going back to this database page, you have under popular databases, Nexis Uni is there as well. It used to be known as LexisNexis. So if you have a professor telling you to search for LexisNexis, definitely go there. Nexis Uni is really good for tying together news and current events with legal information. This is a database highly used by people who are in political science and law classes. So if you're planning to go to law school, Nexis Uni is your friend because it not only brings you newspapers, but you see it brings you full court cases. And so it can often tie those together. But this is one. You search just like you do with everything else. Type in your keywords, make sure you're spelling things correctly. And so you see it defaults to bringing in the news. You can limit to only news. You can look at law cases and company information as well. But this is one that does a lot of international stuff. And so a lot of these are seen coming out of the United Kingdom. This one's coming out of the U.S. Federal Business Wire, etc. So you're seeing these newspaper titles. That one's coming out of Canada. Looking at newspapers, I prefer America's News over Nexis Uni. You get a lot of overlap with major papers within this. They both also have major state papers. I just prefer America's News, but they function pretty much the same. Put in your keywords. You have your limiters over here, so you can limit by publication type, date, timeline would be your date limiter there. Click on the title, you find out more about it. So you get that full text of the article. You get the information about where did this come from. If it has an author, it's going to be up here. Lots of times, especially if it's a news wire, you don't have a specific author associated with it. So you just skip that and put the article title in that first place and then followed by the date. So you're seeing April 13th. Another thing to remember about newspapers is you want the full date. Because most newspapers and Newswire publish daily, we need to know exactly which day it came from. We don't just want 2020. We don't want April 2020. I want to know this came out on April 13th. That's why you're not looking through 365 issues of the newspaper trying to find this specific article. So this is one, because you don't have specific volume and issue, you need that full date. So make sure you're getting that. Up here, once again, email to yourself, download. You have the export citation option to where it's going to give you that. Do not, I cannot say this strongly enough, trust citations from LexisNexis. Don't do it. They're bad. They're wrong. I don't know what's wrong with their algorithm on how to create APA citations, but it's so off. It wants to list the date first. That is wrong. Always 100%. So, newspaper citation creators, do not trust them. They are not your friend. They are evil, little, manipulative, red herring distractions, bad citations. Ignore that entirely. I would not trust it. So keep that in mind when looking at these. Create the citation yourself. It's so much easier. Author, date, article title, newspaper title. If you have a page number listed up here, you need to list that. If you don't, leave it out. You don't have DOIs for newspapers, so you won't be including that. You could say accessed from and give the URL, but that's also not required. So keep that in mind. Don't take the citation from LexisNexis Uni. It is bad. It's always off. I don't know why, but it is. All right, so those are two of my major newspapers databases I would highly recommend. We got another newspaper video coming talking about specifically the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal accounts.